there's a lot of story here. The whole altar of Ed, the bloodless altar, all this stuff. So, again, we don't want the promise. Just being close to the promise is good enough. See, guys, being close to the promise is not going to get it. Being close to the presence of God is just, I mean, it's like, whew, man, I just love when God just, I don't get that. Well, why don't you get that? Are you praying, seeking the Lord? Are you spending, silence and solitude time? No. Well, maybe just get in there and find Him. Get in there and find Him. Or get in there and let Him uncover your heart for you. So, we don't want the promise. Give us what we want according to our desires. So this is what we want according to our desires. So, folks, I'm going to tell you, I'm afraid that today, in today's society, that as a whole, I think we're settling. And we're not talking about lost people. We're talking about God's people right here. The nation of Israel, God's people. We're talking about them. We're talking about what we're calling Christians today. We're settling for something that is a counterfeit vision. It looks decent. It looks good for now. Why are people not flogging to get to the presence of the Lord? Because what they're seeing in us is not that great of a representation. It's because, they can sense in us and see in us that we're sold out half to this and half to this. So, I mean, why? Maybe, I'm just saying, I'm making a statement that, let's just say, is it because of this? We're settling. We're getting close enough to the promise to feel it, to smell it, and to hear it. When I grew up, we had, my grandmother's house, both my grandparents' house, we had to go to an outhouse. Just because I could get close to it and feel it and hear it and smell it didn't mean that if I didn't go, I wasn't going to mess my pants up. So, I'm just telling you, I can't just stand there and say, you know what, that's the place I need to be right now. But I'm not going to do it. I can feel, I'm not that close. See, thanks, but no thanks. Sorry. Moses spends 20-ish verses trying to talk them out of this, off and on. So verse 33, and Moses, he gave in. He gave them to the people of Gad and to the people of Reuben. And now we've got the half tribe of Manasseh. So let me make sure you don't misunderstand. They're not a tribe of little people. So, when you see the half tribe, it's not, So it is Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. So basically, Manasseh is the oldest. So basically, you got the 12 tribes of Israel, and then one tribe is divisional. So the kingdom of, he divides it up, and he gives it to them, and he says, this is what you can have. If you want this, you're driving me crazy, you can have it. Notice again, 3 tribes stayed on the east side of the river, committed to fight for the promise that would belong to somebody else. I'm going to fight for your promise. Now, we've got people in our lives right now that will fight for your victory. Man, they will fight for your victory. They will drag you back out of they'll drag your old wounded body right out of the fight, patch you up and get you going back in. They care enough about your victory. But this is different. We're going to go fight for somebody else's promise and somebody else's vision, but we're going to just go right back to the old side where there is no presence of the Lord. So, tribes of Gad, Reuben, and half tribe of Manasseh, Joseph, one of Joseph's sons. So, remember, this was still the slavery side of the river. Just because it's close to the river doesn't mean that it's not still the slavery side of the river. It's still the wilderness side, the disobedient side, the wandering side. It is still that is desert mentality. So, what's the big deal? We could say, what's the big deal? We read this, what's the big deal? It was in Egypt. They left Egypt. They crossed the Red Sea. So they've got a whole sea that divides them from who they used to be. So they've already had one crossing. Guys, one crossing's not going to get us to the promise. 2 crossings are going to get us to the promise. One's just going to get us in the proximity. And when we're in the proximity of the presence of the Lord, it is different than being in the presence of the Lord. So, let's keep that in mind. So, what's the big deal? It's not Egypt. The land's fertile. It's good for them. Hey, it works. Perfect for livestock. Land's land, right? Land's land. No, land's not just land. See, the conquest of Canaan wasn't left for Moses to do. Do you realize Moses never carried a sword? He led a nation of 2.5 million estimated people with a stick and the presence of the Lord through him. He didn't have to dictate. He just led. But it was Joshua's job to grab the sword. It was Joshua's job to conquer the land. So Joshua, in that 5 to 7 years-ish, right in there, Israel defeated 31 kings. Now, these were kings listed with lands. Kingdoms, kings and kingdoms. 31. Bang, 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 bang. Just knocked them out. They possessed all those lands for themselves. God was with them on top of all that. And Joshua then gets toward the end of the book of Joshua. He starts dividing up the land. Now, we're getting somewhere with this 1 degree of separation. This is an estimated 4.25 million acres. I could lay up in that. 4.25 million acres. And they knocked that out in 5 to 7 years. And now Joshua is saying, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to give you your 600,000 acres. I'm going to give you your 800,000 acres. I'm going to give you your 450,000 acres. I'm going to allot this off to the tribes. What about Gad? What about Manasseh? And what about Reuben? They don't get any because they've already made their deal. All they got was a pat on the back and an altar that they built that was bloodless that connected them with us. So, Moses passes on the leadership, or God does, into Joshua. So now let's get to Joshua chapter 22, verses 1 through 4, and we will see, our final visit here in this Old Testament story. At that time, Joshua summoned the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. And he said to them, you have kept all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, and have obeyed my voice and all that I have commanded you. Now let's just think about something right here. Let's talk about the 1 degree of separation. They're being bragged on. You're doing a good job. You've done everything I asked you to do. You haven't done anything that would cause me to have any kind of problems with you at all. You guys have been forthright in everything. You fought. Some of you guys have died. You know what? And so think about this. 1 degree doesn't look that far off when you're being bragged on, when you're being esteemed, when you're being exalted. It doesn't look that far off, and it doesn't seem that far off. You have not forsaken your brothers, verse 3, these many days, down to this day, all the way. You haven't quit, but have been careful to keep the charge of the Lord your God, still esteeming them. Now, the Lord your God has given rest to your brothers as he has promised them. Therefore turn and go to your tents in the land where your possession lies, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you on the other side of the Jordan. In other words, I'm honoring what Moses said. You can go on back now. So there's a whole sermon that I've preached a couple of them before and love it, this whole bloodless altar thing. It comes into play. But we're going to skip that part. So what's the big deal? The conquest was successful. Everybody got what they wanted. All is well, right? All is well. That's good. So everybody got what they wanted. Brothers, it worked out. But we can't forget the 1 degree of separation. We can't forget it. So let's find out what happened. So what happened to these tribes? What happened to them? Did they stay a few years? Did they leave? Were they successful with their livestock? Almost promise, let's keep this in mind, is not all promise. Almost promise is almost. All promise is everything. So almost promise is not all promise. So let's go to Mark chapter 5, verse 1 through 4. And this was a sermon that I preached back in October that I'd love to preach it again. I liked it so well. So they came to the other side of the sea. This is Jesus' disciples with him. Jesus sets out and he goes across the sea. This is the Sea of Galilee. The Jordan River empties and feeds into the Sea of Galilee. So basically, this is them going from the west side of the Sea of Galilee to the east side. So Jesus and his disciples, remember the storm comes up and all this. There's a reason why the devil didn't want them to be there. So that's the other sermon. They came to the country of the Gerasenes. Verse 2, and when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately, that's the word we need to remember, there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. In verse 3, he lived among the tombs, so no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. Now, most people are pretty well tied down with a chain. This guy wasn't. Verse 4, for he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but he wrenched the chains apart and he broke the shackles in pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. So let me visit back to verse 1 in the King James. That was the ESV. Let me visit back to the King James, verse 1 in the King James. And they came over unto the other side of the sea, ordeal, storms, all that stuff, into the country of the Gadarenes. So we start to see a connection here. So, verse 13. So, when we go to verse 13, there's something that's happened here. So, as he gets to the land of the Gadarenes, what they see is they see tombs, they see demon-possessed man, they see pigs. Jesus, this guy has so many demons in him that he cast them into the swine. They went over the hill, drowned. Okay, so we know what. So verse 13. So he gave them permission. They're begging him, just cast us somewhere. In other words, so we can get somewhere else. Don't bind us in the abyss. And the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs and the herd, numbering about 2,000. That's a lot of demons, guys. That's a lot. That's a lot. You realize how messed up this region is to have this many demons in one man? Okay, so they rushed down the steep bank and into the sea and drowned in the sea. And verse 17, and the people began to beg Jesus to leave. Okay, so notice with me, it's about 1,500-ish years later since they conquered the land of Canaan, and the Gadites and the tribe of Manasseh and the Reubenites went back onto the east side of the river. So it's been about 1,500-ish years. The land is called the land of Gadarenes, after Gad. Still on the other side of the sea, other side of the river. So 1,500 years, in 1,500 years, the tribe of Gad went from valiant warriors. Man, you guys are awesome. You're powerful. God is doing work, mighty work through you. They went from being the junk. They defeated 31 kings and 31 kingdoms. Jericho being one of them, God powdered the walls and let them fall. Let their enemy fall before them. Now we've got 1,500 years later. They went from valiant warriors to pig farmers. Now, this is a Jewish taboo. This is a Jewish unclean animal. It is strictly forbidden. That was as far away from the Lord as you could possibly get. Now they're hog farming. Not only are they hog farming, the first thing that they see, remember the word immediately, the first thing that they see is demon possession. The second thing that we see and we hear of is the tombs. So they're surrounded by death, burial, demonic oppression, demonic possession, and they're totally out of the will of God. So this is what they're seeing. They made Jesus leave rather than accept change and instruction. Now, this sermon here comes full circle and comes back around later on. It's good, too. So, basically, it's one of 2 months ago sermon. Man, I'd love to preach it again. It's that good. So, 1 degree of separation today will result in massive disobedience later. So, it's called progressive disobedience. In other words, I will progress in my disobedience to the point to where I make my own sins acceptable in my own sight. So in other words, if I keep doing it and I keep convincing everybody that it's right, then I'm going to convince eventually myself that I'm doing right. So we move one holy connection in our lives today, then we'll move more holy connections in our lives tomorrow. See, we'll begin to start moving and repiecing our lives to suit the livestock that we have. Do you realize they got completely off course because of cattle? Because of I don't know what kind of livestock they had, but because of what they had then, they were so far off course later. Everything was off course. So, see, we'll do this until eventually our families are totally lost. We're living in a society, guys, we live in the Bible Belt. This is straight up the Bible Belt. And I don't understand. I don't understand why the population of Christianity and church attendance in White County, Putnam County, Fentress County, it doesn't matter. Warren County, I don't understand why the population of Christian involvement and church attendance is not 95, 99%. We live in the Bible Belt. Why is it not more? Why is it not? Because we got off maybe a little degree a generation or two ago. And then we got off a little bit more. And then this became acceptable. See, that used to not be acceptable, but now it's fully acceptable. Do you realize there's things written in our applications in our Bibles that should not be there? I'm not knocking Bible. I mean, I read them and I'm like, I don't know. I'm not sure about that one. Like prehistoric. There's no such word as prehistoric. So, bondage is spelled generational curses, depression, oppression, possession. This is how you spell bondage. They all start with 1 degree. Every alcoholic starts with 1 drink. Every addict starts with 1 pill or 1 joint, probably. Every abusive husband starts with what he saw his father do, probably. 1 degree of separation then. So, just ask Larry, and we'll just initials M, last name M. Let's just ask Larry M. Larry was taught that drinking was acceptable social involvement. Larry's father was a part-time bartender. He was raised to believe that fellowship happened in the bar. You didn't get fellowship at church. That was not something they did. But fellowship happened in the bar, not in the church. So in other words, you ever see these movies, it's like, well, after it's over with, they have a party at the bar for somebody, a memorial. I'm like, Lord, help us. So Larry was raised for this to be normal. He was exposed to this normalization of alcohol on a daily regimen. On May 14th, 1988, Larry chose to drink and drive. He'd been having a good time. See, here's what I've read about Larry. Larry was a super likable guy. You realize I had a guy who used to work for Tina and I who was an alcoholic, and I said, but the guy was so nice. He said, all drunks are nice at one point in time. I mean, he struggled with it himself. He said, I'm nice today, but get me drunk and I'm not going to be nice. So he was described as being a model father, a good provider, a hard worker. He was a great guy. But somebody got their degree of separation off a little bit somewhere up the line. Larry chose to drink and drive. Been hanging out at the county fair all day, having a good time drinking, getting more and more drunk. This night, he got on Interstate 71. So here's the thing. Remember that river thing? Both sides of the river look the same. You know what? You get on the highway, I promise you, all the lines are painted yellow. All the pavement is black. And if it's going that way, it's paved and marked the same way that this one on the other side's going. It looks the same. See, he began his day with about maybe 1 degree off. 1 degree. Maybe started, I'll just drink 1. I'll hang out with you guys and drink. Larry left the fair that night, and he got on the interstate on the wrong side. See, the vision's counterfeited. It looks like the road he's supposed to be on. He got on that road. He got on the wrong road, going the wrong way. And, a bus from a local Assembly of God had went to Kings Island with a bunch of kids, 60-something people on the bus. He hit them head on, killed 27 people. 24 of those were children and teens. they died because he got off this much in his judgment. Maybe the tragedy is not as much Larry's fault, maybe as it is his father's fault. I'm not passing the buck. He's responsible for his own actions. But if you don't know what's right, you don't know what's right. Amen. So maybe, you know, it still doesn't take away the fact he's a great guy. He was convicted to 16 years in prison, served almost 10. Larry talked about God in court. Talked about his relationship with the Lord in court. When he was being sentenced, he talked about God. He said he didn't remember anything. I'm going to tell you, the devil's going to make sure you don't remember the most important things. Said he didn't remember anything. Said he was told what had happened when he woke up at the hospital. And he said, it's a nightmare that I live with every day that never goes away. Just a good dude. A good dude that just needed the Lord. Just needed somebody to tell him how good God was. And he took, I mean, he's responsible for 20. It's the absolute worst drunk driving accident on record even to this day. He has to live with his 1 degree every day. This is his legacy. I want to cry for this guy. This is the legacy that he will leave. He will forever be remembered for a lifestyle that maybe he didn't choose and maybe he cultivated because he didn't know any better. Maybe he did. I don't know. 1 degree now can affect lives we don't even know. How important is it for us to walk with the Lord? It is so important that the devil wants to make sure that you don't see it. That's how important it is. So let's just ask. How important it is, let's go back to those individuals. Let's ask Janet Kida. Her husband died in that bus that day. Is it important for us to know what the vision is and follow it? Let's ask Carolyn Nunley, whose daughter was 10 years old. She was the youngest child to die in that bus that day. Let's just ask Quentin Higgins. He was 15 years old. He lost friends. Let's ask Darren Jacks. He was a teenager. He lost friends. He drives a bus now for a living. Let's ask Lee Williams. He buried his wife and 2 daughters from that one accident. What do they think 1 degree of separation looks like? So notice something in Genesis chapter 48, verse 14. Let's remember Manasseh and Ephraim. Remember, Manasseh was the one tribe that stayed on the east side of the river. So let's go back to Genesis 48:14. And Israel stretched out, this is Jacob, stretched out his hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim. Stretched out his right hand, laid it on the head of Ephraim. In other words, this is basically the blessing being passed to him. He was the younger one. And he put the left hand on Manasseh. And Joseph said, whoa, no. It's this way, Dad. No, it's not. It's this way. I'm giving the greater blessing to the younger son. Well, why? Maybe it's because in his spirit he knew that one day they wouldn't possess the promise. If I'm not going to bless you so you can just give everything away and follow after your own desires, I'm not going to bless that. I will bless Ephraim because Ephraim will follow after the promise and after the vision of the Lord. Without possession, you can't receive the greater blessing. So I don't want to leave on this whole negative note. I want us to leave on this. I want to show you what staying focused looks like. I want to show you what chasing the promise looks like. I want to show you what it looks like to say no to the east side of the river and yes to the west side of the river. I want to show you what it's like to fight for what God has given you the vision for. I will show you. There's a young mother in the 1990s. A young mother, and she helped lead her small church. And she even helped lead the youth group because, you know, back in those days, you had to do it all. She helped lead the youth group, and her daughter was in that youth group, and her daughter was dating a young man, and they were childhood sweethearts, and they were both in the youth group. And later on, that young couple got married, and they raised their children the same way that she poured into them. They raised their children to know the Lord. So, and to make that priority and chase after. Don't get confused on which side of the river you're supposed to be on. See, they raised their children. They went on staff at a church for 13 years, and that young couple will be the new executive pastors at this church next week. That's who we're talking about. That's what it looks like. They will stand on this platform and they will carry vision forward, and they are as much of the future of this church as anybody can be. And some of you guys don't even know them yet. It's okay. I'm going to show you what it looks like when you chase after the vision, you pour into somebody's life, and you reap the reward for it. You know what? Would it have been easier to stay home all those many days and all those many nights and say, look, I can't keep fighting this battle? Put a smiley face on the corner if finances were met that morning, and a frowny face if finances were not met that morning. In other words, we're this close to not having a church because we're a small church, but we got a big vision. And see what God is doing. See what God is doing. 1 degree of separation for Israel, 1,500 years later, became pig farmers, demon possession, death, and tombs, and hog farming. So I want to ask you. I want you to get it. I want each one of us to get it right today. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Never going to have another 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 day. This is the first and probably only. Let's get it right today. Let's commit it today, because if I don't get my life right now, my children are going to have to pay for my sins.